With its rapid surge in popularity over the past few weeks, I finally got around to watching Squid Game, the Netflix series where a group of desperate people play in children's games for a chance to win a lottery's worth of prize money. Once they begin playing, however, they discover that in order to compete, they'll have to risk something as well: their lives. They'll have to face death if they want to win, pushing each of these characters to the brink of their own humanity, forcing them to confront their own morality and willpower. Such an intense level of desperation, along with many of the game's strange rules and procedures, brings out some compelling characters that only become more interesting as the show unravels, giving me the perfect opportunity to rank them. So here are the 9 main characters in Squid Game ranked from worst to best. In last place, I'm going with the goofiest character in the series, Minyo. As the clear comic relief in a show that so often carries a burden of darkness, Minyo stands out. She's comical and exaggerated, every action she takes feeling like something out of a cartoon. Even her more serious moments feel over the top. Through her performance, she showcases the emotional extremes of the game and presents a stark contrast to many of the characters she interacts with, putting into perspective the seriousness of these games. In terms of memorability, she's certainly not last, standing as one of the most identifiable elements of the series. But competing against characters that have so much more emotional and thematic weight, I think she ranks near the end, though with how much unique value she provides, I can still see her ranked as high as 6. In 8th place, I'm going with Jun-ho, the police officer who sneaks onto the island and investigates the mystery of this strange place. Jun-ho has a much different role than the other characters in the story, the only real force acting against this institution despite knowing very little about it. Compared to the other characters on this list, his character feels largely unexplored, so I wouldn't be surprised to see more of him in the following season, even though he has apparently died. Though he's a cop, he seems far more willing to kill than such a job should suggest, hinting at something deeper, some hidden mystery in his motivations. This hostility that he has raises a lot of questions for his character, and depending on how heavily you weigh his more mysterious aspects, I can see him ranked anywhere from 6 to 9. While the game itself acts as a largely intangible force against the players, Deok-soo is a far more direct and clear antagonist. He fits the game so well, fully embracing the brutality it encourages, willing to abuse and even kill the other players to survive, or simply raise his chances of winning. Despite his power and aggression though, he still experiences the same pressure from the game, and when faced with the overwhelming odds of failure, of his death, his macho persona dissolves and reveals a man just as afraid as everyone else. I find his fall, this realization of his cowardice hidden behind strength, interesting enough to see him as high as number 6, but if you're lower on his success as an antagonist, especially in the episodes before his death, then I can even see him as low as 9, but for now, I think he's number 7. Ali is the most sympathetic character in the series, partly because the show focuses less on developing him than many of the other characters, making it so that the development he does receive centers almost entirely around his goodness, something that acts in stark contrast to a character I'll talk about later. As a result, he comes across as naive, too trusting of those around him, and while this makes him the antithesis of what the game stands for, it also makes him more likable. Even in the face of death, he doesn't succumb to the violence and manipulation that the game promotes, and while that may seem honorable, his death as a result of that very honor and respect reveals the terrifying truth of the game, that kindness doesn't prevail, violence does. With all that said, I can see him ranked anywhere from 5 to 8. Next up, we have the character with the least development, the frontman. Even more than the other masked characters in the series, the frontman is shrouded in mystery, but it's that very ambiguity that makes him so interesting to me. The few hints that we do get about his backstory suggest a darkness that originates within a previous version of these games, potentially establishing him as the deepest progression of the game's influence. His strict adherence to the rules seems to reach a point of reverence and paints a dark but interesting picture about how deeply these games can shape people. With so much provocative mystery, I'm looking forward to learning more about him, and in time, he could easily move higher, and depending on how much you extrapolate based on the few clues we've been given, I can see him ranked as high as 2 and as low as 7. Se-byuk's perception changes greatly throughout the season. At first, we see her as a bit aloof and self-centered, but as time goes on, as we understand her motivations, we begin to empathize with her desperation within and outside of the game. Her detachment and distrust of others amplify her poor initial perception, but even as the games become more dangerous, even though she's just as much a pawn as the other players, she doesn't take advantage of those around her. Because of her past, she's become reluctant to work with others, and seeing that hesitancy slowly break down as she befriends and opens up to the other players gives her a clear progression that differentiates her from the other characters and makes her death more devastating. The relationship she has with her brother ends up being one of the most important and arguably the deepest emotional cores in the series, and presents the clearest example of how the game affects those outside of it, the loss that will forever shape her brother. With all that said, I can see her ranked anywhere from 2 to 5. As the protagonist, Gian has the most screen time, giving him more opportunities to develop and allowing us to more deeply connect with him. We understand his motivations, why he feels compelled to play the game. He has a daughter and mother that he loves and tries to take care of, but as his flaws present themselves, he often falls victim to his own irresponsibility, disappointing everyone around him. Despite being the main character though, one that's meant to be likable, he's not perfect. Though he works with Ilnam in the marble game, someone others wanted to avoid, Gian takes advantage of him when faced with the certainty of death, showing that the game has corrupted him as well. The difficult choices he makes reflect how the game has shaped him, turned him from bumbling and lackadaisical to determined and dogmatic. With the shift we see in the last few episodes and the implication of where he'll be in the following seasons, he has a lot of potential to move up. Right now though, I'm putting him at number 3, but I can see him ranked anywhere as high as 1 to as low as 4. Ilnam's perception changes more than any other character, offering the most significant twist in the series with this reveal in the final episode. Through most of the first viewing, he acts as a representation of the fragility of old age, how impending death changes a person, and the consequences that come with it. It feels so innocent and sad, but further viewings turn this representation sour. The idea that he wanted to have fun before he died ends up feeling selfish after causing so many to die. The final conversation he has with Gian reveals the grim outlook he has of the world, establishing an ideological battle between the two that will likely continue in the following seasons, though probably with other characters as well, since he died. Ilnam, more than any other character, changes how we perceive the events of the show. He raises many questions about the nature of the game and the future of the series, and for that, deserves second place on this list. Though I can even see an argument for number 1, but I'd have a hard time going below number 4. And for number 1, I could only give it to Sang-woo, the player who most clearly embodies the effects of the game. Even more than Deok-soo, Sang-woo loses himself as the game goes on. The severity of his corruption increases as the danger does. He hides his knowledge as early as the second game to maintain even the smallest advantage over the other players. He abuses his power over Ali, manipulating his respect for him and leading to arguably the biggest and most heartbreaking betrayal in the series. One could easily argue though that the game did not change him, but that he had been like this even before he began playing, and that the game simply created an environment that exaggerated these darker aspects of his character. The blurriness of how much the game has shaped him makes him even more interesting and representative of the game's goals. The overwhelming burden of his perception as this pristine, well put together genius pushes him to become as ruthless as he does. Much like many of the other players, but even more so, he sees money as the only thing that can save him, to the point that he would rather die than leave empty-handed. His motivations and path throughout the season reveal a lot about the show's views on money and how it controls so much of our lives. It was what made him join this deadly game in the first place, but also the only thing that could save him in his eyes. It held both his life and death in its hands. Though he firmly held the #1 spot for me, I can see an outside argument for him to be ranked as low as 3. So that's my list, all 9 of the main cast of Squid Game ranked. Let me know how you'd rank the characters in the show, and check out this video on what makes Morpheus so cool in The Matrix, or this one on one of the most stylish anime, Afro Samurai. Thanks for watching.